Hello, good afternoon. Once more from Finland. Today we are focusing on Module 6, Session 5, which is about current entrepreneurial university transformation patterns in Africa. This session is based on our empirical study across three of Africa's sub-regions, the English-speaking and French-speaking African countries. It is also based, besides the one-size-fits pathways, such as that of Clark that was used in the European Union. This is based on a new strand of literature by JIP 2000, especially the publication in 2012, where JIP postulates that that current practices and patterns of entrepreneurship practices in universities can be used more strategically to develop the university institutionally as an entrepreneurial university. To us, this was a little bit very realistic, because as we say in the literature, you see, as we say in the literature, you see that every university has some pockets of entrepreneurship and enterprising activities. So we wanted to find out in different African countries, universities, which patterns they are using to be entrepreneurial. We now try to examine and analyze the synergistic potentials of these patterns with the development of an entrepreneurial university. We use an interpretative approach, also based on the literature and the actual practices in African university. Now, we begin by looking at certain literature that have been written about entrepreneurial university transformation. One of the first was the second study by Clark, after the one with the European Union universities. Clark second publication in 2004 labeled Makerere University in Uganda as an entrepreneurial university because of its distinguishing entrepreneurial culture and courage to diversify its income basis. In 2012, which was part of my dissertation, I used Burton Clark's 5 pathways to examine how entrepreneurial universities, how the Clark's 5 pathways could be responded to within the Cameroonian higher education system. Here, I affirm that autonomy, which is one of the pathways or the elements or features of the entrepreneurial university, is well affirmed in Cameroon, but this is a little bit controversial. I shall say why. The reason why autonomy is an important element of entrepreneurial university is because it enables the university to be able to take its own risk. Now, when you see in this Cameroonian case, look at it in this Cameroonian case, you see that yes, the documents talk about autonomy, but there is still a very firm hand of the ministry in universities. And also, the ministry is linked to a particular political system. And so, when it is linked to a particular political system, it ties the hands of universities from really enjoying this autonomy. I found out that, okay, what Burton Clark talked about as strong academic heartland, yes, Cameroon represents one of the strongest higher education systems in Central Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, that has a strong academic heartland, academic resources. Cameroon, I think since 2003, does not recruit lecturers that do not hold doctoral degrees. This is quite good and even strange, because even some developed countries still use employ lecturers of universities who do not yet have doctoral degrees. So if you take from around 2003, it has the knowledge, the professors with the knowledge potentials to even to get into knowledge-based entrepreneurship. Of course, the study, my doctoral dissertation, also identified various structures in the university to connect universities to economic development operators, which is what Burton Clark called the enhanced developmental periphery. Now, but what I found, okay, when it goes to this issue of autonomy also, one of the things I identified, and which is a phenomenon in Francophone Africa, is the fact that university senior administrators, rectors, registrars, secretary general are appointed in some countries by a presidential decree. They are appointed by presidential decrees, which shows how linked they are to the system, which also affects to an extent their autonomy. I cite the fact that, for instance, the example that it is difficult even for rectors. Okay, the second issue is that in these countries, most of the university lecturers are civil servants. So I cite in the paper the example that entrepreneurial universities compensate for performance. Okay, when you have most of these staff, they are civil servants, the university administrators are recruited by presidential decrees. One, it is difficult, it's a very difficult process, for instance, to sack a professor in Cameroon for poor performance. This is good from the perspective that it secures the academic profession. But when it comes to performance now, it is a little bit difficult even for the rectors to hire and also fire professors on performance basis. So I talked of two strong. One of the challenges also I met in these studies is the misconstruction between enterprising business activities and the entrepreneurial university concept. I mean, when you find some business units, when you find some streams of income, they say, no, we are entrepreneurial. Okay, poor funding is also part of the challenges to be entrepreneurial in many sub-Saharan countries. Of course, many of them could interact, but it is difficult to have engaged in truly knowledge-based innovative activities without good funding. So I mentioned two strong government steering and a very thin line with national political structures. So I summarize it by calling it a controversial autonomy, appointment of rectors by presidential decrees. I also identified in this study that, okay, many universities would like to say they are entrepreneurial because they are linked to certain main industries, the hydrocarbon industries, several big industries, and so on and so forth, which are few, whereas also very few universities, whereas also the ecosystem of African universities is surrounded by small and medium-sized industries. So this is a problem because because these small and medium-sized industries are composed of almost 70% of the productive capacity for which the university is supposed to articulate. So I say typically in Francophone Africa, university principal officers are appointed by presidential decrees and the staff are civil servants. This beats politicization of an allegiance to the political system, limiting the manager's discretion to take risk, which is an important characteristic of the entrepreneurial university. So my colleagues, Moodle and colleagues also try to use the 5 pathways by Burton Clark in the Addis Ababa University, where they also talk about strong central governmental-led steering, which weakens organizational entrepreneurial behavior and culture in Ethiopian universities. Okay, one of our colleagues in Namibia also studied, tried to look at these entrepreneurial university concepts in Nigeria, in Namibia, and concluded that there is the need for alternative pathways. So we look at this notion of using, creating the role of synergy between these entrepreneurship practices of African universities and the ways they can create entrepreneurial university. What was important, what was interesting to notice in this study is that, okay, you meet rectors, you meet senior managers, and you ask them which patterns, which categories of entrepreneurship. They are unable to give an overview of the different patterns, and this begins to question on what basis some of the entrepreneurship practices are stimulated. So we believe this is a humble attempt to produce a holistic framework that can give an overview of different patterns and how to stimulate the different patterns in an institutional way, so that to see how the university develop more institutionally as entrepreneurial. So Gibbs, the assumption is that rather than structures bringing different patterns of entrepreneurship, that is like, unlike Burton Clark, who talks of institutional characteristics, bringing different patterns of entrepreneurship in a strategic manner can make the university more entrepreneurial. So we argue in this publication that rather than borrowing pathways, this approach can address more effectively the different governance systems, meanings, resource mobilization process, development context, and business practices in which African universities operate. Now, let us try to look at the different structural patterns. We look at the structures of entrepreneurship in English and French-speaking African countries, for instance, Cameroon, Ghana, and Uganda. So we find at the institutional level that there is an emergence of a binary system in most Anglophone countries, which gives room for more applied institutions. When we start studying the part, or whenever we had the session concerning Finland, we would look at this dual or binary ways of structuring, which is giving way to a new sector. Okay, what happened was that, so we count within the systemic perspective, especially in Anglophone Africa, the comprehensive universities and the interest for, the interest to have a more applied universities, which turns to be more entrepreneurial. If you look, I think Ghana has attempted to have this two structure. When you look at cases like the Kwame University of Science and Technology, there is the constant emergence of these universities of science and technology, I think Ethiopia is emerging also, binary, Tanzania, Uganda, etc. But now, when it comes to the institutional, we find the notion of specialized entrepreneurial establishment. Okay, now we found in Francophone area the notion of some applied establishments, where we look at it and conclude that while Anglophone Africa was going through this binary system, the notion of the entrepreneurial university, the concept in Francophone African universities is about a corporate faculty-like group of institutions which turn to be entrepreneurial. So, Anglophone Africa, yes, it's about institutions, and Francophone Africa about specialized establishments which are faculty-like. I mean, this Francophone system has its roots in the history of higher education. So now, within the institution, now we have three structural patterns within the university. This specialized entrepreneurial establishment, we say yes, it looks like a Francophone pattern, but we're also finding the development of such a concept in Ghana. For instance, the background of the Institute of Applied Sciences, where it developed to take care of these applied practices of the university. So we say, yeah, this looks like a French speaking, from a historical perspective, a Francophone perspective, to have some establishments that are truly entrepreneurial. But then this concept was also being developed in Ghana. Of course, this is not exclusive also, because almost in every university you have faculties that are more interactive with the environment, could generate more income. Now, so we say we identify the 9 patterns. So 2 institutional, 3 within the middle level of the universities. Within these 3, which are within the middle level of the university, we find specialized entrepreneurial establishments, we find entrepreneurial centers, we find peripheries. That is, we call them peripheries because in some universities these entrepreneurial centers were in the center and some were in the peripheries, attached to faculties and sometimes department. The third one is Entrepreneurial Island, which we call Entrepreneurial Island. This has shown in some Western universities, where universities decide to focus on some programs that have the propensity to drive the university's entrepreneurial. They could decide that, see that maybe their market niche is in biotechnology, and they invest in it, and this is seen also to be driving the university entrepreneurial. So at the basic level, we find the teacher-directed entrepreneurship. We have researcher-led entrepreneurship, which is based on the abilities of teachers to win, researchers to win grants from international foundations and from local organizations. We have student-directed entrepreneurship, that is the ones that is tailored as training students to be entrepreneurial. But then we also find in some of the universities, interesting cases in Ghana, that there were student-led entrepreneurship patterns where the university is having a name for becoming entrepreneurial, carrying out entrepreneurial practices because of the ingenuity of particular students or postgraduate. So this is important and very important to be promoted when we see that some of the facilities that mankind enjoys today has been triggered by students or postgraduate students. When we think of the television, when we think of Google, for instance, etc. So this really have to be thought about. So we laid in the paper, we laid this down. This structural pattern is in the narrative. So we call it systemic. At the higher education system level, at the university level, the university structural level and governance, we find this. The entrepreneurial specialized establishment, entrepreneurial centers and peripheries, entrepreneurial islands of disciplines. So at the basic unit now we have the 4 levels. So this made them 9 patterns. Now, so within the systemic level, we gave the name implied entrepreneurial universities. These universities were created to be very interactive, to be very to be entrepreneurial, because there is enough evidence in the literature that applied institutions are more entrepreneurial. So we call them the implied entrepreneurial universities. They are very interactive. Within this, we find 2 categories. A type of what we call research-based technotype and vocational technical institutions. We call this research-based technotype, for instance, the case of the Kwame University of Science and Technology, because they are science and technology institutions, but they do research. They are vocational and technical institutions also in Africa, which are entrepreneurial, applied, but they do not do research. So that is where we made the difference between these. So by default, they tend to be actively entrepreneurial. They have higher employability rates. Their graduates have higher employability rates. They undertake more interactions with economic development actors. They have peculiar non-government income generation culture. They have skills acquisition and applied societal problem solving. They, in some of these universities, you see them often emphasizing leadership training and skills development courses for wealth creation. So some of them generate very significant third stream incomes. Some of them also, and then who says significant third stream income also says that they also generate their financial they are self-reliant. Okay, who says self-reliance also says that more autonomy, that is more voice of the university. So we have cases here in this implied dimension, we say, where universities operate their own companies. Although this was not in our study, we took the example of Dar es Salaam Institute of Technology, which has a limited company involved in the construction and civil electronic, telecommunication, and other industrial works in Tanzania. So these are incubating institutions for talented entrepreneurs and technology developers. They are technology-dominated universities. Some of the institution developmental missions and reputation for forming technology. They have institutional developmental mission and reputation for forming technology-minded, employable graduates. They coordinate the use of their expertise for the industrial, socio-economic, for industrial and socio-economic development. So the differentiating factors when we use cases now like the Kwame University of Science and Technology is that it is involved in research, and many of these vocational institutions that turn to be entrepreneurial do not. So we call it research-based technotype. We call the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology research-based technotype. Very comparable, which is very comparable to many entrepreneurial universities in the industrialized countries. Has an atypical system of fast leadership, well streamlined governance structure. We know that streamlining governance is also part of entrepreneurial universities. We said earlier that if you have an economic operator who wants to do business with the university, and everything has to go through the committee, the faculty committees, departmental committees, committees of deans and director, by the time it goes through, the company would not be interested. So Kwame Nkrumah University, which was in our case study, has very strong university industry orientation. So we cite the case of the Kumasi Business Incubation Center at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, several support programs for young students with business ideas, mentorship and support programs which attract private sector experts, increase in entrepreneurship and student employment, a strong combination of applied and research agendas for industrial entrepreneurship. We cite, for instance, research chairs from the petroleum company in Ghana. We were also attracted by its master's program in intellectual property rights that can build a critical mass of intellectual property rights experts. We look, when Burton Clark talks about the enhanced developmental periphery, he said these units were in charge of extra fundraising, they were in charge of intellectual property issues, they were in charge of patenting, etc. So in the comprehensive universities also, we find that profound changes are taking place. Many of them are modifying their mission, vision, and commitment statements to induce the universities to be entrepreneurial universities, with new statements such as innovation, business knowledge transfer, enterprising. Then we find also a particular, within the past 10-15 years, we call it, we would situate that there is a particular tendencies now in some African comprehensive universities towards decentralization. We find, like in Makerere University, most recently there has been a transition from faculty-based system to the collegiate system. I mean, there is also evidence in the literature that when you empower the local, the different, you empower the bottom structures, they can also act, and so the university level only comes to give legitimacy. So one of the effects, we have also cited the movement in Ghana, University of Ghana, towards this, from this faculty base to a collegiate system. The explanation we get is that there have been too many layers and dysfunctional committee systems in this university. In University of Douala, for instance, in Cameroon, it is believed that streamlining, the University of Douala believes in the streamlining of decision-making structures. As we say, business operators do not have the time to wait for ideas to go through the many decision-making instances of the university. We shall be seeing when we go to leadership that those have some of been the weaknesses of university, where it was showing that it has been too slow. So we find a tendency towards devolving autonomy to the university operational units, where councils and senates mostly meet to vet decisions that may have been made in the lower levels. So we also find changes in the, especially in the research, the research management structures of the universities. We are citing the case of the Office of Research and Innovation and Development at University of Ghana, they call it ORID, as an institution-wide structure. So what we see there, once this was instituted, is the additional function of innovation, which is typical for entrepreneurial universities. We remember when you read the literature, Burton Clark's literature, he merely found that the word innovation was a free term to use before he called them entrepreneurial universities. Otherwise, he would have used the word innovation, the innovative university, because one of the key features of entrepreneurial university is innovation in terms of structures, innovation to adapt, innovation to adapt to change, for instance. Okay, we find, for instance, in 2007 in Cameroon, that the vice rector for research was converted to the vice rector for research, cooperation, and relations with the business world. So we find also different centers, the emergence of several centers involved in entrepreneurship in the African universities. In Cameroon, University of Douala, for instance, we find multiple non-traditional and interface units composed of university actors and economic operators. This, during my study in 2012, aligned to what Burton Clark called the enhanced developmental periphery. So these structures, interface structures, are meant to orientate program with economic operators. We find in Makerere, I was recently there and tried to interview the official in charge of this. They call it Knowledge Transfer Partners Program. I think, if I remember one again, there's another one at Makerere University, which is called the Private Sector Forum. So this gives more tendency to have close collaboration with industry associations. So we also found close and structured relationship with confederal organizations in charge of industries, such as in Cameroon, where you have what they call the GCAM, and in Ghana, the Association of Industries. There are also elements of diversification, which is funding diversification practices in African universities, which is one of the second pathway of Burton Clark, which is about diversifying the income basis. Now we find, for instance, in Makerere University, the endowment fund to mobilize international and local funds. We have Makerere Holding Company, which is intended to business investment issues. I luckily happen to have talked also with some officials of the Makerere University Holding Company when I visited Makerere University. So we also have many African universities have moved towards international partnerships as strategy to access global capital. Okay, in some literature they say it's a weakness. Other literature is a weakness to depend on international partners to develop your entrepreneurial activities. Okay, a weakness to depend on international partners for research funding. But on the other hand, we must also be realistic that globalization has come to stay. So strategies to access global capital can be a valid university strategy. Okay, in 2018 at University of Ghana, there were over 83 partnerships with 27 countries with students, scholars, and collaborators from over 60 countries. Makerere University had 336 partnerships annually, signs about 36 partnerships annually with diverse global partners, which coincides with registered income stream. I was just looking at that of University of Boya. Also, it has about 40 partners. So we look at the specialized entrepreneurial establishment. We've looked at the implied entrepreneurial universities. We've looked at the the comprehensive universities, the entrepreneurial transformation going on in African university. Now, let us go into the university, where we begin with the typical Francophone system, which relies on the applied corporate establishments such as faculties, centers, institutes, and schools within universities. The applied establishments in Francophone Africa, we found the cases which are very interactive, very creative, like the Institut Universitaire de Technologie, the IUTs. So in Francophone Africa, these establishments called établissements describe corporate faculty-like structures such as within the university. So earlier on, they often offered short 2-year certificate called Diplôme Universitaire de Technologie, Brevet de Technicien Supérieur, but also bachelor and masters in direct employment relevant programs. So they have a reputation for graduate employability and direct links with industries. They offer civil, electrical, engineering, computer maintenance, software, and mechanical engineering, among others. So they often conceive programs and construct laboratories with industries. When I look at the case of the University of Douala, which in Cameroon, which in turn generate additional income for universities. They are prone to creating applications and develop new, innovative, and marketable products. We found the case of in the University of Douala, where you would expect that it is the Ministry of Higher Education that would come to sponsor prototypes in the university, but it was the case of the Ministry of Mines. So we find this like also very good systemic example. But while we talk of the Institut Universitaire de Technologie, the IUT, we note that from history, the French system has been built this way with older types of applied establishment called grandes écoles and advanced schools, such as the national. We cite the example of the National Polytechnic schools. The National Polytechnic schools in Francophone Africa. Of course, in the history of higher education, you find the cases such as the École Polytechnique de Paris and several grandes écoles that were built in this manner to be applied. Okay, one of the main difference with these IUTs, the Institut Universitaire de Technologie, is that, okay, older establishments like the Polytechnique have most recently adopted research. I think also that one of the reasons also is the Bologna process. The adoption of the bachelor, master, doctorate has pushed most of these polytechnics to in Francophone Africa to do research, because they now train for doctorates, etc. Now, we say within the university now, we have what we call the Entrepreneurial Island. Okay, this is traditional because we note that some programs are normally more markedly friendly than others, but it's a traditional but strategic discipline-based approach to university entrepreneurship, which capitalizes on programs with higher propensity to drive the university more entrepreneurial. Where some universities typically concentrate higher investment and launch new ventures, including in small laboratories. In the studied cases, we drew up this name from a Belgium case. In this study case, almost half of the entrepreneurship activities were concentrated in the life science departments, with the most active spin-offs coming from biotechnology. We seem to also describe that the latest World Bank Center of Excellence is built on this entrepreneurial island approach, which concentrates on some departments. Of course, entrepreneurship is not articulated in the World Bank objective, but we think that it will be implied that when the program becomes so applied, there will be more entrepreneurial. Of course, we mentioned in the narrative that some countries also create their own entrepreneurial island. I was very impressed during one of my last visits, research trip to Makerere University, where the president of Uganda himself comes to launch such centers of excellence. So, entrepreneurial centers and periphery, they are development centers and incubators for entrepreneurship, which have interdisciplinary and multi-faculty orientation. I said some were really central. I was in the University of Gambia, for instance, where they have a central office for this to discuss these issues of applications, multi-faculty applications for external use. They usually belong to the central administration, the case of Gambia, but some are peripheral, attached to faculties or departments. Okay, you can also count in some African universities business consultancy units involved in pockets of entrepreneurship. They are fostering students' employment and enterprise creation capabilities and talents. So our interviewees say this reduce unemployment and poverty, generally ensure economic growth. So these centers and peripheries could promote business incubation, innovation, mentorship, and enterprise training. We cite the University of Cape Coast in Ghana, the University of Cape Coast, Ghana Center for Entrepreneurship and Small Enterprise Development, as part of which we saw as part of cooperation with a German university. I think at the last part of the narrative, we also say that since entrepreneurship issues and innovation were beginning to be very important topics in Africa, it is also an important topic for cooperation. I think our colleagues have articulated about the German African platform for entrepreneurship. So there's the emergence of the new concept of platforms now between partners of the North and of the South, such as on certain crucial topics in Africa, such as entrepreneurship. We also note that this course is part of a huge project called the Finland Africa Platform for Innovation between the University of Turku, Finland, and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. So we shall talk later about the new concept of platforms that are emerging around this critical topic between Africa and Europe. So they have several institution-wide activities, business clinic, entrepreneurship programs for graduates, entrepreneurship continuing education program, careers and counseling center. For instance, at the University of Ghana, they promote and nurture innovative ideas. So now we go to the one that focuses on staff. We identified what they call researcher-based entrepreneurship. This is likened to one of the four models. We have a question about stating the different models of entrepreneurship as per Eskowitz. He talks, who talks of the government-pulled entrepreneurship, university-pulled entrepreneurship, industry-led entrepreneurship, and then so this researcher base is comparable to what they call science-led entrepreneurship, given that some universities, major lecturers, academics, and scientists are also leading partners of some university entrepreneurial activities. So this researcher base, we said these are determined by the ability of university researchers to win grants from international foundations, local organizations, and industry. International research fundings, I think if you look at the annual plan of the University, Makerere University, they say that international research funding defines university international trust, increase in projects according to our interviews in University of Douala, increase in international projects and research funding can be an indicator of academic strength and international competitiveness of the university. So what is influencing this also is the role of research and project-based structures such as the ORIT, Office of Research and Development in University of Ghana. We found that this pattern also, with the advent of information and communication technology, this pattern also has increased, in African university. It has increased universities' research capacity. Okay, alumni networks also play a great role in stimulating this research based pattern. Of course, we can mention globalization. And during the interview, many of our interviewees say that, although they access the capital globally, they are used to solve local problems, addressing national health, agriculture, environmental, energy, and food security issues. Some of them are used for, some of these researchers gain this income to the university through commissioned research, capacity building with local organization, some advisory and contract services, advocacy, and dissemination. So it's typically said in Makerere University that research, this dissemination aspect, research dissemination keeps the university afloat in national policy domain. So another reason also is research-based grants which help human resources from this pattern, which help to strengthen human resources by producing PhDs, developing new products, creating jobs, and engaging in poverty reduction strategies. Now, the most common that is known is the teacher-centered entrepreneurship, which focuses on building teachers' capacity towards entrepreneurship. It refers to all pedagogical and curricular processes to build teachers' entrepreneurship teaching skill in order to stimulate student mindset to become more entrepreneurial, which involves integrating skills that students can use to create, maintain, and manage employment. So this is about fostering teachers' coaching and student incubation capacity. So we talk of student entrepreneurship. Well, during the interviews, we found that, okay, some people prefer to use the teacher-focused dimension, but others also use student-centered entrepreneurship that is focused on students, enabling students create talents and employability and creativity requirements, internships and courses in entrepreneurship, mandatory business plan development, institution-wide pedagogy that put premium on experiential learning. I think that University of Ghana also most recently also adopted this experiential learning. Okay, now in most francophone countries, you have the importance. I have been surprised also to see that in some francophone universities, how they pay this attention to staff academic, even on programs that you would not imagine, just to make it applied, just to improve the graduate employability of the students. Okay, if we take the case of the universities of Boya or in many Anglophone African countries, it's also about the build capacities by getting students take minors in applied disciplines. This means that if a student was doing maybe history, he can take a minor in journalism, which is professional to get easy facilitate employment. So the student this is one area that we see that can easily boost the economy and has a direct positive impact on tax revenue once a student is employable because of the professional skills, because of the entrepreneurship skills. Okay, student-led entrepreneurship is about cases where we found supporting cases in which student is involved in invention, innovation, and startup of enterprises or spin-off, which is increasingly also gaining prominence in many of the studied universities in Africa, our studied universities. One interviewee mentioned that if the academics have failed in innovation, then we should try students. We cited case examples of Ghana, 3 students from the University of Mines and Technology, Takwa, who created a 3D printer using materials from electronic waste. We have cited in the paper the CardioPad, a machine for diagnosing heart diseases in Cameroon by a student. In Tanzania also, we analyzed a student who designed a solar power equipment to provide electricity to the houses in his grandmother's village. So we have cited that this is very prominent, that it is interesting also to look at how universities can stimulate this student-led dimension. Allô? 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 Abdou? Allô? 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 Allô?
Allô? Oui.
Oui, nous avons tellement perdu du temps. J'ai d'autres programmes et je ne voudrais pas commencer avec la session sur la Finlande parce que c'est une session qui attire beaucoup d'attention. Donc, si ça ne vous gêne pas, je sais que peut-être vous travaillez, je vais essayer de boucler ça le prochain jour, si on commence vite.
D'accord.
C'est bon, Abdou?
Oui, c'est bon. Maintenant, qu'est-ce que vous voulez qu'on fasse?
Qu'on passe à un autre jour.
Je vous entends très très mal. Oui.
Qu'on se termine aujourd'hui, il n'y a que 23 slides, on a tellement perdu du temps. J'envisageais 30 ou 35 pour faire le demi, mais je vais essayer de compléter ça dans le prochain.
Ok. Bon, j'ai du mal à saisir. Est-ce que vous pouvez écrire sur le chat?
Pardon?
Sur le chat à côté, là où je viens de vous écrire. Parce que le son n'est pas... Est-ce que vous pouvez écrire sur le chat à côté?